Hey friends, and welcome back to the Stitch Up. Thank you so much for joining me today. It has been a little while. We had some time off from doing episodes, during which I started up a podcast with a friend of mine, Addy. How you doing, pal? Called the Film Addicts Podcast, which comes out weekly. Took up a bit more of my time. So yeah, I haven't had a chance to get one of these episodes out to you, but I had to return. For another Halloween spectacular. And this year, I decided to do a franchise of films that don't have as many entries as the Halloweenathon. Christ, I can't remember, it was like 13 or 14? Not this year. This year, we're doing Scream, and there's only 5 of them. But we've got to start at the very top, the tip of the spear, the peak of the valley, whatever the fuck. It's Scream from 1996. Now, directed by horror master Wes Craven, he did most of these films except for the last one, which we'll talk about a bit later. Horror legend, and Kevin Williamson, who at the time was the king of this sort of teen, quippy drama kind of stuff, and this was sort of his big foray into feature films. Previously, he'd created the show Dawson's Creek. Now, anybody who was born after the year 2000 wouldn't remember a time when this kind of meta or self-referential horror was the norm. It just didn't exist yet. It was genre rebuilding, honestly, and it ended up being the thing that all the studios wanted. It was so popular, in fact, it completely changed the way that the studios did business. They no longer wanted what would be considered B-movies. They wanted Scream. They wanted to Scream. And there was an absolute surge of this kind of stuff in pop culture at the time. You had things like The Faculty. I Know What You Did Last Summer. I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. What Are You Up To on the Weekend? You're a Shit Heap at Winter. That wasn't one. That's a good name for a movie, though. You're a Shit Heap at Winter. And it's just someone killing everybody because they're cold. And, Urban Legend. Disturbing Behavior. Teaching Mrs. Tingle. All these teen-centric horror movies were the thing. It took all the genre conventions that you would be familiar with from horror, and Wes was the king of that. He worked in a lot of those genres, and flipped them. The film clearly had an impact in the same way that Jaws made people not want to go to the ocean. In America, the service, like caller ID service, before cell phones and all that, it was a little thing that told you the number was calling. The use of that service went up 300% after the release of this film and its sequel. So the film opens with Drew Barrymore, and she gets murked. But before that, she gets a phone call from who we later on would understand is Ghostface. Or Stu and Billy. Spoilers, by the way. Roger Jackson plays the voice of Ghostface and still does now in the most recent one that came out in 2021. Or maybe it was 2022. Was it the beginning of this year or end of last year? Can't remember. The one question I had about this scene, even when I first saw it, was who the fuck stays on the phone to a wrong number this long? It's weird. And I don't know if it was maybe the cut that I was listening to, like the specific stream of it or whatever, or maybe it was the speakers, I'm not really sure. But I can hear crickets outside, but she's inside. That's a weird mix, Wes. There's a nice little gag about her saying that, because they're talking about horror movies, as you do, and there's a nice little gag saying that the Nightmare on Elm Street, the only good Nightmare on Elm Street film is the first one. Well done, Wes. It's true. So there's none of those very good, which is why they're not this year's Halloweenathon or Screamathon. It's a Screamathon. This film and some of its sequels are interesting in the fact that they're kind of bloodless. There's murders and things like that, obviously, because it's a horror movie, but it didn't veer into that post sort of 2005 Saw pornography shit that became super popular, like the really grotesque kind of stuff. In the same way that pornography stuff kind of took over from, the real estate that Scream had. Scream took over from the OG horror movie, which at that point was veering into B. Like, you had so many sequels within a franchise. Speaking of the Nightmare on Elm Street and what's the other one? Friday the 13th. All that stuff had been getting very low budget, lo-fi, kind of just get them out as quickly as you can. Scream had a prestige cast, a prestige director. Kevin Williamson was the biggest writer on the planet at the time. Dawson's Creek was insane, super popular. And it was shot really well. There was money behind it. It was backed by a large studio that, that specialized in this kind of stuff, this teen stuff. Yeah, and then the pornography kind of started to sneak in and does a little bit in these sequels as well. Then we have the introduction of Neve Campbell as Sid. She will be with us for the majority of the franchise. And Skeet Ulrich. Or maybe it's Ulrich. But anyway, what kind of Hollywood career do you think you're going to have if your first name's Skeet? Courtney Cox is introduced in a fantastic avocado power suit. And this was her like trying to get away from her stigma, I guess you could call it, that she was the nice girl. She was Monica. And in this, she gets to play the bitch. That's not a word I'm using. It's a word that she literally used when saying that's why she took the role, so that she could play that kind of a character. David Arquette, her not yet husband as Dewey. And Henry Winkler, who I adore. Barry's such a great show, and he's awesome. He's hilariously funny. He plays the principal in this, and after the first murder, there's like a scene where it's sort of is craning down over the kids, coming into school, leaving school, and there's a message over the loudspeaker. Henry Winkler as the principal, and he's saying, "Your principal loves you and wants you to be safe." My principal didn't even come close to saying anything like that to the student body. He may have said to me once, "Regan, get out." But that's what I get for breaking into his house. Matthew Lillard as Stu is really great. He's got a fantastic manic energy. He actually got this role sort of by accident. His girlfriend at the time was in the building where the auditions for Scream were taking place, auditioning for something else. And the casting director saw him in the hall and thought he had a good kind of vibe about him. And then he went on to have a lovely career. Shaggy represent. And then you kind of finish up the cast, Rose McGowan playing a character who will inevitably be dead meat, and Jamie Kennedy, young comedian at the time, doing just that. He could have probably done this role without the Jerry Lewis impersonation, but hey, he's having a good time. So Sydney gets attacked at her house, and she's on the phone. She thinks it's Jamie Kennedy's character, Randy, and it turns out to be Ghostface, and he's in the house, and she gets attacked. The thing that I could never understand is if Billy and Stu's ultimate goal is to sort of reveal all this to Sydney, reveal what's happened, reveal that it was, her mother breaking up, Billy's parents, because of an affair, that was sort of the reason, and they wanted her to know that in the end. Why the fuck are they trying to kill her at all? It's more haphazard than the final act will let you believe. But horror logic again. We'll come back to horror logic a lot. Some of the scenes in this film were able to combat the high definition sort of revolution that we've had in the last, 27 years or however long it's been since this film came out. Fuck, that's a long time. Sorry, it just dawned on me. And some aren't, because in this particular attack scene, Neve Campbell's stunt double looks like a 48-year-old man. And that's cool. That's cool. Sometimes you've got to take those tumbles down the stairs, isn't it? Billy turns up, he's got a phone on him, she thinks it's him, he gets arrested. As far as David Arquette's character as Dewey, I don't know why he has to be so fucking inept in his job, or at least in this first one. Like at one point he's talking to the sheriff and he's eating an ice cream. I'm like, are you on duty? Like, what the fuck? Stop eating sweets while you're trying to save teens from being murdered. But I do believe that he is one of the absolute reasons that we are currently suffering through a return of the 90s mustache. All of the Scream movies have a tendency to do this, or probably bar the most recent one, but then again, I'm not really sure about everybody's age, but they've all got like 25-year-olds playing 17-year-olds. It's very 90210-ish. On a personal note, the streaming service that I use to watch this, and I won't say which one because it is a major one, streams this film in 1:8:5:1, which is full screen, so 16:9. Like this is currently that you're watching. This film was shot anamorphically, which is 2:3:5:1, so there should be black bars, top and bottom. That is disgusting, and I won't have it. I just went really high, Jerry Seinfeld for a second. I won't deal with it. Hey, that was pretty good. Another thing you'll forget about this film is that Liev Schreiber's in it, and he plays Cotton Weary, only in news broadcast footage. He's the one who was put away for killing and raping Sydney's mum. Finds out that he's actually innocent, and he comes back in the sequels. But in this one, he's just in news footage. But yeah, what an amazing actor to have in such a small part. But I guess he wasn't that big of an actor at the time. Cotton's a weird name, though. Stu decides to have a party because they all get the day off because their friends are being murdered. Now, I like having a day off too, don't get me wrong, but because of the football or, some royalty or whatever, not because teens are being murdered. So we have the third act party, which always happens in these movies, and it fucking rules. And look, anybody who was in high school between 95 and 2000, if you want a forced death march down memory lane, listen to the soundtrack to this film. And I don't mean the score, I mean the actual songs that appear. It is a treat. Rose McGowan gets murked here, seemingly for no other reason than she has erect nipples. I mean, come on. It's probably cold in that garage. That seems unfair. And I always think this about all of these films, even the most recent one. Ghostface is such a fucking klutz. He or they or whoever it is at the time gets knocked down so often and falls on the ground or gets hit with things or trips downstairs or whatever. He's been knocked down more times than Chumbawamba. Do you remember that song? Should I put a bit of it in? I get knocked down, but I get up again. You're never gonna keep me down. Billy turns up to the party, seemingly exonerated from being the murderer, and Sydney thinks that this is the optimum time to relinquish her virginity. I think that's what's going on anyway. Maybe not in a murder house. I mean, I know that she doesn't know that her friend's been murdered yet, but still. And they're getting all hot and heavy, and Stu says, what is it? It's one big movie. Life's just one big movie, and you get to pick your genre. And he's trying to be sexy, but it's Skeet Ulrich, so it's tough. And Nev Campbell goes, oh, why can't I be in a Meg Ryan movie? Or at least a good porno? That's an oxymoron. You don't watch a porno because it's good. We get the big reveal after both Randy and Dewey get injured. They fake stab each other, and Stu comes in and reveals himself to be the killer as well, or one of the killers, which is a pretty cool twist, having two of them. Like, I do really dig that. But then again, the pageantry of all this stuff. Like, if that was the goal, why are they trying to kill her earlier? I can't figure it out. Are they trying not to kill her? Are they just trying to scare her? The mind boggles. So yeah, they're stabbing each other to kind of make it look like they're the victims, and it was actually Sydney's dad who they're framing. But Gail comes along and Sydney escapes, and we have the final sort of fight where you have the one of the killers is down, but the other one comes back to life and gets shot in the head. It's all very Scream-tastic, because it's something that this particular series of films does very, very well. That denouement, that final few moments where you know what you're going to get, but you still enjoy it. And then we just go straight to credits. And despite all its 90s hippiness and the really sharp and glib dialogue that these teenagers have, which isn't true to reality at all, it's an amazing picture. It's got great structure. The acts are really well paced. Everything leads into each other. There's great character development. There's some real people here. It's got a great 40-minute last act sequence just at this house. It completely rebuilt the genre. So I'm going to have to give it what we're doing this time. Instead of pumpkins, we're going with ghost faces, and I'm going for 5 big ghost faces on Scream 1995. 1996. Next on the list, we have, of course, Scream 2 from only the following year, 1997.
Hello?
Hello, Sydney. Remember me?
What do you want?
I want you. It's showtime.
Now, this film was released only a year. It might have even been a little less than a year after the original. So much so that there was a trailer for it on the original Scream film's VHS release. And if you don't know what a VHS is, kids, go and ask your parents. Or alternatively, go fuck yourselves. And it was a closely guarded secret. Like, this thing was huge. Scream was one of the biggest movies that Miramax had at that point, or Dimension rather. And they wanted to keep it pretty tight. They had a bunch of different endings. And the cast themselves were only given the last 10 pages towards the end of the shooting period, so that they wouldn't be able to reveal who the killer was. The screenplay leaked online, so Kevin Williamson kind of had to rewrite almost the entire thing, was my understanding. And I think maybe it kind of suffered because of that. We're post-high school, we're into college, but before we see Sydney, we go to a film premiere of the movie Stab, which is it's a film that was made about the Woodsboro murders. Now, at this screening, people are losing their fucking minds. They're running around in ghost face masks. They're screaming. They're shouting. They're pretending to murder each other with fake knives. Like, it's really full on. Are people really this callous? Like, I know that serial killer stuff is really popular. I mean, look at the Netflix Dahmer show. Like, that thing's going crazy. I haven't seen it, so I'm not going to comment. But it's people were watching it, that's for sure. But I don't understand how you could go and, especially when it's based on real murders. Yeah, it just seems rude, if nothing else. And now we're introduced to Omar Epps and Jada Pinkett Smith's characters who are going to see the movie. And they both get murdered. And there's a whole bunch of Oscars jokes you can make there for yourself. Also, the stab movie that appears in the film, all of those sequences, sort of the recreation of that beginning with Drew Barrymore, and then a scene later on, a sort of redo of the conversation that, what's his name? Skeet Ulrich and Nev Campbell have in the school is sort of recreated, and it was directed by Robert Rodriguez. Now, I was talking to an actor the other day, and we were talking about they were in a performance where they had to pretend that they were acting. So there's an actor pretending that they can't act, which sounds really hard. It must be even more difficult for a director like of Robert Rodriguez's caliber to pretend that he can't direct. But so Sydney's in college and she's getting prank calls and she's kind of, just dealing with it, knowing the movie's coming out. And she sees Cotton, on TV being released, talking about how, he was falsely accused and all that stuff. I still can't get over the name Cotton. It's really weird. It's like, oh, this is my friend Silk. Is he a rapper? No. Well, then that's a fucking stupid name. We cut to a film class at this college filled with prestige 90s kids. You've got Sarah Michelle Gellar from Buffy. You've got Joshua Jackson, Pacey, this is pre-Pacey, and you also have Timothy Oliphant, wonderful, way before Bullock from Deadwood, and way before anything else really, and spoilers, he's one of the killers. And we have the return of Randy, and they're talking about cinema violence and how violence in the movies can affect society and affect people and make them violent, which isn't true, unless you then prove the fact by having Timothy Oliphant's character end up being the killer at the end and saying that he's going to blame movies. So you're making the statement that is true, which is a bit weird. But then they're talking about how all sequels suck. See what you did there. So we get the introduction of Derek, lovely frat boy, kind of warm-hearted dude, played by Jerry O'Connell. I like Jerry O'Connell, but I'll just say this one thing about him. Post-Oscars slap, which I don't like talking about it because it's so fucking ridiculous and tabloidy and has nothing to do with filmmaking at all. Everybody had a point of view. Everybody had a comment. And he was on some program, I can't remember what it was called, The View type kind of thing, and they were asking him about it. I'm like, I don't fucking care what Jerry O'Connell has to say right now. Unless he's talking about sliding into alternate dimensions, maybe keep it stum. Gail's back as well. She's sort of riding the wave of her book success, and we're introduced to Debbie Salt, who is another reporter as well, who only really interacts with Gail, not the other kids. And the reason being, spoilers, she's Stu's mum, who's just lost a lot of weight and had some surgery or whatever, and she's sort of seeking her revenge, which makes no fucking sense later on during Randy's death, but we'll get to that. And then Buffy, or Sarah Michelle Gellar, who plays Cece, gets a call at the frat house, or at the sorority house rather, and she's at home by herself. She's sober sister who's at home so that people can call if they need a lift or whatever. And she gets a call from a person who she thinks is Ted, her boyfriend, who she's like, oh, I think he's drunk again, to her girlfriend. I'm like, well, if that's your college boyfriend's behaviour, that's a bad omen. Ghostface attacks and she gets defenestrated, my favourite. And that's how it goes down. But then everybody kind of, they don't openly celebrate, but they're kind of like morbidly intrigued about the whole thing. It's fucking weird. But whatever happened to Sarah Michelle Gellar? She used to be fighting vampires and stuff. They're trying to do this subplot where Sydney feels really guilty about all of these people being killed by what is ostensibly a copycat. But it doesn't come off. It comes off as much more self-involved, really. They do it a bit better in the coming sequels. And there's one point as well where Dewey says to the sheriff, "We've got a copycat on our hands, Sheriff." No fucking shit, man. The two other dudes are dead. It's definitely not them. Idiot. They kind of telegraph the shit out of Debbie Salt being the murderer when you watch it again as well. Or maybe that's with the benefit of hindsight, and also definitely Timothy Olyphant, because he's creepily like filming everything with an old DV camera. Like that's a bad sign. Jerry O'Connell does a Top Gun parody in the cafeteria, which you can fucking keep. Also, there's this thing, it happens at the beginning of the film with the killing of Omar and Jada, and then in the middle where Gail's cameraman is an African-American, and they have this kind of gag about African-American people sort of not lasting very long in these type of movies, like that they're just cannon fodder, I guess you could call it. But don't then make that statement and then also do that. Like the camera guy does survive to the end, but you sort of, as unrepresentative of these casts are in terms of inclusion, and we'll get to that later on, when we get to the later sequels, to make a statement about that and then not follow it through is pretty lame. Sid is a theatre major, so there's this subplot about the play that she's in, which is Agamemnon. And there's a scene where she's like trying to quit, and the guy who runs the theatre department, David Warner, is convincing her not to. And it's a great way to set up like where the final act will happen, like on a stage, the theatrics of it. Very clever, being that it's a sequel to a successful movie, sort of not parodying, but playing into the same conventions as the first one. But David Warner is also the voice of Ra's al Ghul in the Batman animated series from the 90s, and the Loeb from Freakazoid. And the only reason I'm telling you that is because it's one of the most interesting parts of the movie.
Allow me to introduce myself. I am he who is called Ra's al Ghul.
Randy gets a call from the killer and starts insulting the shit out of them while he's sort of running around looking for them, and, says some things about Billy Loomis, who we know his mother is one of the killers. And Randy gets like, the van door opens, Ghostface is there, and he gets fucking poleaxed. He gets lifted and flipped into this van, and then the door's shut and he gets murked. But, I mean, I understand that a mother's power and all that kind of stuff, and, the revenge kind of plot and everything. And we find out that is genuinely Billy's mum, the Debbie Salt character, Mrs. Loomis. We find that out later on, definitely, because she says it. She says, Randy was talking a little bit mean about my Billy and I got a little knife happy. But I mean, flipping him into a van, it was like fucking stone cold Steve Austin. I couldn't do that to that motherfucker. Gail and Dewey break into the film school, which is huge. It's amazing. It makes the film school I went to look like a fucking storage unit. You have that sexy bass music that was playing before as well. But they go into they start getting down, they start getting a bit busy. But then on the screens where they're sort of viewing the tape that they're looking at, another tape starts, and it's videotape of the murders. This should have been a giveaway that it was Timothy Olyphant's character, but anyway. And it's all set up and stuff. But that's another thing as well. This murderer, like I know there's two of them. It's Mrs. Loomis and Timothy Olyphant. I know there's two of them, but how can you be prepared for this? Like, how would you know that they would then go to the film school and, need to use the equipment there or whatever, and to find them there and be ready to play this thing? Like, it borders on precognition at this point. This is the best kill, though, where fucking Gail has to watch a Dewey through the one-way soundproof glass get murdered. I know it might be two-way glass, actually, but it's soundproof, so she can't hear him at first. And then he just gets stabbed and the blood all over the walls. And, oh, man, it's... to watch that have to happen must have been fucking severe. I know it's fake. So let's just jump straight to the end here. There's a bit of a car accident, as Sid and her roommate are being taken into protective custody, and Ghostface attacks, and the cops die, and they manage to squeak out of the car, while the guy's in there, and it's all very tense. But we get to the theatre. And there's what's his name, Jerry O'Connell, who's like strapped up to a cross, and he's been put there by his frat bros because he gave his necklace to Sid with the what are the emblems, the frat house emblems, which I don't understand. There's all the frat houses, all the names, Delta Mega Kappa, and I'm a Wanna Pi, and all that kind of stuff. I don't think that's one of them, but yeah, I'm not really familiar with those because it's not an Australian thing. That's not what we do at universities or colleges here, as far as I understand. But so he gave his little necklace to her. It's a bad move. It's a faux pas. His frat bros have, strapped him up and torn him naked and drawn on him with lipstick and got him drunk or whatever. And he's there, but he's on this cross. And then Timothy Olyphant comes in, reveals himself as the killer and implicates poor Jerry. And then shoots him in the chest, which is always really brutal, like being like strapped up like that and then shot. Like it just, it was uncomfortable to say the least. And then Debbie Salt turns up as well. Timothy Olyphant's character is like, I'm going to blame the movies and the trial's going to be amazing and it's going to rock and everything. And she's like, fuck you, shoots him. It's a stupid idea. And then Cotton comes in, who's been pestering Sydney for an interview on Diane Sawyer the entire film and manages to save the day only by way of Sydney saying, sure, I'll do the interview. Timothy Olyphant comes back for a second and zoom, and that's it. Credits. The biggest thing I'll say about this film is that it doesn't need to be 2 hours long. You can take out Agamemnon. You can take out the fucking Tom Cruise. Well, yes, Tom Cruise. You can take out the Top Gun parody and just have one killer. Remove Debbie Salt from the equation and just have it be crazy Timothy Olyphant. 2 ghost faces. And then to round out this first trilogy, we have, of course, Scream 3 from 2000.
Told you I'd make a movie someday.
Oh my god.
I am not dreaming. I am not crazy. He was there in Woodsboro.
Now, this is interesting. A good friend of mine, Grant Carter, from The Carter Show, he said unto me, there was a version of this movie that was supposed to be Billy Loomis surviving and being in some sort of institution, all right. He had formed a cult, like the Ghostface cult of all these people to do his bidding, like a kind of like a Marilyn Manson? No. What's his name? Manson, you know what I'm talking about. Charles Manson is what I'm trying to say. Like a cult like that he had to do his nefarious schemes and whatever, which is such a fucking great idea. I mean, this isn't bad. It's kind of like a Hollywood parody. But I think that would have been a better movie. What do you reckon? Also, a little aside, I watched this at 9 a.m. and it was fucking weird. So we're going full Hollywoodland spoof now, with this film taking place inside the making of the most recent Stab movie, which almost so meta it's enveloping itself. And it's a Ouroboros, it's the snake eating its own tail. Sid is now a paranoid recluse who does crisis counselling for women via the phone. She's got a gated house with a, electronic lock and 2 locks on the door and all that kind of very shut-in kind of stuff. Really cute dog though. We start with your typical cold open kill with Cotton Weary, now a TV host. He has a show called 100% Cotton, which you can get fucked. That's so stupid. Anyway, he bites it, and that kind of gets us into the main thrust of everything, and we're off to the races. Whatever that means. Courtney Cox is back as Gale, of course, and regardless of everything else, she's got a mad fringe game going on. We get started right away. We're on the set of the film Stab, or Stab 3, or Stab 4, or whatever it is at this point. I can't remember. And Patrick Dempsey's there. He's a detective who's investigating the death of Cotton Weary and his girlfriend. And he's talking about, shutting down this movie. And the director, played by Scott Foley, is actually, spoilers, here we go, he's actually Sid's half-brother. From an affair that her mother had. Well, not an affair, it was an assault, and she had this kid because of it. But we'll get into a bit of that later. But yeah, just remember that. The director of the Stab movie is the stabber. It does seem to be trying to make a statement about how real-life tragedies are exploited by Hollywood to make entertainment. Like I said, previously, things like Dahmer and even 9/11 are used as narrative to get people to come to the cinema, which is in a way quite callous. And at one point to prove this, Gail says, someone quotes her book saying that pop culture is the new politics. You can get fucked it is. Wes has gone full Nightmare on Elm Street with this one, so much so that Sid is having visions of her mother, like ghostly visions. Very, very Nightmare, absolutely. Even the way that it's shot, and lit, it looks like something from a Nightmare sequel. The cast of the Stab movie starts to get bumped off in really interesting ways. Wes is absolutely on his game here. This is much better directed, much slicker than the previous sequel. And Jesus, they blow up an entire house to kill a dude, which is pretty cool. That's new ground. Immolation. The voice modulator thing that's used throughout the rest of the film, for Ghostface, hello Sydney, and that's not a very good version of it, but you know what I'm talking about. In this one, it's so advanced that Scott Foley's murderer character is able to mimic other people's voices, which is a good narrative device to kind of trick people into being places where they don't want to be or whatever. But I don't understand how that would work. I mean, could you even do that now, 22 years later? Let me know in the comments if you're a technical wizard. Dan, tell me if you can do this. And if you don't know who Dan is, don't worry about it. He knows who he is. In the film, there's 3 versions of the stab script, so they don't know who's going to be killed in what order. I think this is a response to how the second film's was leaked. The script was leaked. Sid finally turns up about an hour into this film, and we get, Randy from the grave via a VHS tape, sort of giving the rules of what you are if you're in a trilogy. If you find yourself in a trilogy, all bets are off. No one knows what might happen. Even main characters can die, which is funny because he died in the last movie, not this one. You get a Carrie Fisher cameo, which is pretty cool. They do make a joke about how they're like, aren't you? And she's like, no, I get that all the time. People just, I was supposed to be in Star Wars, but, I wouldn't sleep with George Lucas, which is horrifying thought even in 2000. But I'm just joking. You're gorgeous, George. It'd be funny if he was watching this. Gorgeous George. Anyway, I digress again. This is a little bit rough, this part. Through finding the information, Gail and the person who plays like her in the movie, a Stab, played by Parker Posey, who's wonderful. Like, she's such a fantastic actress. There's a great line where she gets punched and falls down. She says, "My lawyer liked that," and it's just pitch perfect. Like, she's such a good comedian. But anyway, more to the point. They go to Carrie Fisher and they find out that Sydney's mum, under a different name, was a B-movie actress who was in movies that was produced by the same guy who's producing the Stab films, a character played by Lance Hendrickson. They go to him and they find out that Sydney's mum was assaulted by a bunch of people while working on these films, including Lance Hendrickson, which is how she got pregnant with the Scott Foley character. This is made even more uncomfortable by the fact that these Scream films, apart from the most recent one, were all produced by the Weinsteins. There's nothing funny about that. I just thought it was strange that would appear in the film, and then 16 years later, it would all become very, very real. Having Sid confronted on the set of Stab, which is a recreation of where the original murders happened, plays into the idea of that trauma, or that she's still trying to process. It's explored a little bit better in the coming sequel, but they do touch on it, that sort of trauma that Sydney's dealing with, and then on top of that, whether or not her mother might be involved in some way. In this one, the action makes less sense than the others, in the sense that if it's just about a high body count, which seems to be all the Scott Foley's character is. His motivations aren't super clear. He's angry because when he found out that Sydney's mum was his mum and he went to her to say, "Hey, I'm your son," she rejected him. And so he's going after Sydney. But how he managed to get himself into the position of being director of this film, I don't know. But if it's just about a body count, why use a knife? That's super counterproductive. You've got to be close. It takes time. It's not always effective. Like, you would think that, especially in America, they'd use a gun or a fucking bazooka or a flamethrower or a crossbow or something. Also, it goes to like the Hollywood Mansion, Lance Hendrickson's producer's character's Hollywood Mansion, where they're having a birthday party for Scott Foley's character, the director, and he's pretending he's all pissed and whatever. That kicks on. But it cuts back to the police station and they're all standing around eating pizza. It was just a weird insert. Like, I thought maybe it was break time and Wes was like, let's just grab a crowd shot. We might need it later. Let's just get a wide, like an establishing of this thing, and they're all eating pizza. Strange. I wouldn't be that hungry around all the murders. Certainly not for pizza. Dewey and Gail get kidnapped, which draws Sydney into the drama, and she turns up. And despite having, the killer ask to sort of, check herself with a metal detector that he's left, she manages to get a pistol in and shoots him like 6 times, but all center mass. I'm like, come on, we've been here before. This isn't your first rodeo, Sydney. You got to treat these motherfuckers like zombies, headshots, and then stand on their head until they're jelly. And then we have the big reveal. Scott Foley takes off his mask and says, "I'm your half brother." It's the one time that I'll say the one killer thing doesn't work. It could have worked in the previous sequel in Scream 2, but it doesn't work in this one. There's too much has to happen for him to be able to orchestrate it all just by himself. He needs to be in too many places at once. So logic-wise, it breaks down. But again, horror logic. I like the symbolic nature at the end, you know, after it's all kind of over, Sydney, you know, opening the gate wide and leaving the door open. That's the final shot, you know. She goes in and doesn't set the alarm and just lets the door open in the wind. It's nice and symbolic and would have been a good kind of rounding out of the series, but there's 2 more sequels. The action moves along at a nice clip, and despite the daffy reveal of it being Sid's half-brother, who goes on to tell us that he provoked Stu and Billy into wanting to kill Sydney's mum, and she was this sort of B-movie secret Hollywood starlet. This is the 3rd best of the films, and not in the order that you think. I'm gonna give it 3 ghost faces.
We're all here. The party can begin.
Now onto the first film post-original trilogy. It's Scream 4 from 2011.
What good's to be a survivor in this little drama if everyone close to you is dead?
So it's 11 years later, and we're talking about fame. We're talking about people who nowadays would be Instagram influencers or, you know, TikTok users or whatever, who will just do anything. What won't they do to be famous? And it feels, again, oddly prescient. This was sadly the final film for Wes Craven. He passed away in 2015. At the beginning, the cold open, they're talking about torture porn and Facebook and being stalked online. It's all very of its time, but does feel like it would fit, you know, in a movie that came out now. And you also know that it's 2011 because they make a Channing Tatum's hot joke. I mean, Channing Tatum's not hot anymore or anything, but they just don't talk about him as much. And then we find out it's a movie inside of a movie inside of a movie. And it's that post-modern meta shit, according to Suki. You know Suki? What's her name? Rogue? She would hate it if she just got called her characters all the time. Anna Paquin. Little piano kid. Did she play the piano on the piano? I don't know, I haven't seen it. She won an Academy Award though. Congratulations. It's funny that making a comment about how franchises, as they go further in, start to devolve and lose the point of what they're doing. You know, saying that Stab 7 or whatever, you know, the Stab series inside of this film series, it has to do with time travel and stuff. And it's interesting because it's, you know, post-Gornography, everybody kind of felt that way about horror movies. It was a new time. We had films like Iron Man to come out. Avengers was only a year after this. So the shift in what was popular franchise-wise was really dramatic. For them to be commenting on it at this early in the game, again, it's just there's Kevin Williamson knew some stuff that was going on. Sydney's on her book tour, and her agent is Alison Bray. Wonderful. She just came and stole all of Sarah Michelle Gellar's career, really. And of course, we have Dewey back again, David Arquette, who's the sheriff now, and you know that because he has a decidedly bigger mustache. And he's still with Gale as well, which is nice. It's been a good decade for our pals. We get some new blood as well. Hayden Panettiere, who is, I think that's how you pronounce it, Hayden Panettiere, rocking a haircut straight out of Ghostbusters. She looks like Zool. And you also have Emma Roberts as Sydney's cousin, who, spoilers, is one of the killers because she wants to be famous. We'll come back to that, even more so. And also Home Alone's brother, the younger Culkin. He's in it too. He's one of the killers as well. He's really great, actually. He's kind of really creepy and like an incel. And it's again, there's some prescience here. I'm telling you, Kevin Williamson has a time machine. And it's not a DeLorean. It would be something else. You get introduced to a bunch of other dead meats, you know, the friends. There's a kid with like a webcam head thing. That technology didn't really go on. I suppose maybe it did if you're like a Twitch streamer or whatever that thing is. But yeah, that's aged poorly, that section. And the jump off is jumping off. We're getting kids killed, and you know, it's particularly savage. You know, this is post the Gornography craze as well, which is interesting to see it kind of try and find a middle ground. But you know, it's slicker. It's really sharply shot. Like it's the action's, you know, really has a great propulsion in a way that it's not just kind of sort of sits there and happens. It's visceral, much more visceral is the word I'm trying to find. A good friend once told me that you're only supposed to spend 5% of your time looking in the rearview mirror, and that's probably true of life and of driving. But if you were to go through this kind of trauma with a group of people, it would be all your life would be about. 3 separate incidents of these mass murders based around, this one particular killer who started out getting revenge because, your mum caused a marriage to break up because of infidelity. Like that you would never repair from that. And it's interesting to see them kind of inexorably drawn back together time and time again. And at one point, what horror movie are they watching to set this very specifically in the time that it was made? It's Shaun of the Dead, obviously. It's funny, there isn't like an escalation here of to nudity, and they talk about it at one point as well. Nudity in horror movies, and it's a fairly sort of typical genre trope. You do see some young girls in underwear and stuff, but they're supposed to be teenagers, so it's good that they don't do that, but it's that they don't do it at all is kind of subverts what the expectation is. Not a criticism, it's just an observation based on the genre. Like I said before, the horror is amped up a bit, the gore of it, and it is trying to find a middle ground between what it was and what it needs to be post pornography, torture porn in 2011. There's a particularly brutal scene where Hayden Panettiere's and Emma Roberts' character. I wonder how often that happens. Emma Roberts' character have to watch their friend sort of across the street through a window get murdered, and it's brutal. Like she gets hacked up and slashed and thrown out of a window and then pulled back in, and she's cut open and all her intestines are everywhere. There's blood everywhere. Like it's probably the most brutal kill of any of the films, honestly. But I'm not a huge fan of that kind of horror. Like it seems too easy, but I do like that they're trying new things at the very least, trying to find, like I said, that middle ground. Gail teams up with a couple of kids from the film class, one of whom is, Macaulay Culkin's brother, and the other one who's the webcam head, who's Frankie Muniz's clone, as far as I understand. She sort of wants to kind of reclaim some glory. I think the domestic life doesn't suit her so well. Sydney goes to the film club to talk to these kids, and they try and figure out what's going to happen based on the genre and the new tropes of what horror is. The film club does seem to be a little bit obsessed with horror. They've got posters everywhere, one of which is for Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, and if you've seen my Halloweenathon from last year, they can get fucked. The thing they do talk about that's interesting is that in the time that they're in, webcams, online sort of social media proliferation throughout culture, throughout everywhere, that the killer would absolutely be recording these murders. And that's very much what happens. We have the ubiquitous party scene, a Screamathon, which is at a barn for whatever reason, and it's kind of a bit of a fake out. You think that this might end up being where our denouement happens because Gail gets injured. She gets stabbed in the shoulder, and I nearly said Stewie then. Dewey turns up to kind of save her. But then we move to what is actually the final act of the film, which happens at Hayden Panettiere's house. Kirby, her name is. There's also a scene where there's 2 cops, one of which is Anthony Anderson, and one of the kids from the OC, Adam Brody, are sitting in a car, and there are 2 cops sitting outside Sydney's auntie's house. And they're talking about how the cops always die in these movies, they never live, and blah, blah. I'm like, well, dudes, wind your fucking windows up for starters. And then later on, Adam Brody's character leaves, and Anthony Anderson's character gets stabbed in the head, like all the way to the hilt, and manages to stumble out of his car and then fall to his death, but still manages to get out and throw a few punches and everything. Wild. So as I said, the final movement of the film happens at Kirby's house, and it's just a stab fest. People getting murked left and right. But I can't understand how I don't know. If Emma Roberts' character is at her home, at her auntie's place, and then kind of sneaks out, and if this, the young kid, whose name keeps escaping me, but the younger Macaulay Culkin, if he is at the Screamathon, who's killing the cops? Like the timing doesn't seem to work out right. But yet again, horror logic. Cynthia will appreciate that. Charlie is the name of the character who the Culkin plays. He reveals himself to be the killer and kind of an incel by killing Kirby, like going, now you notice me. And Jill, who's the Emma Roberts character, she reveals herself to be the other killer. And as I said, She wants to be famous. It's about likes. It's about people noticing her. Jill says at one point, I don't need friends, I need fans. That is fucked up. You know, she's been living in the shadow of her cousin who survived these attacks so long. She wants to be the final girl. And she sort of murks everyone, or thinks she does, and then she beats herself up like fucking Jim Carrey in Liar Liar.
I'm kicking my ass! Do you mind?
And we have the final movement of the film, the final movement of the film, I guess you'd call it the epilogue even, at the hospital. While Jill's in the hospital bed, she kind of lets it slip to Dewey that she and Gail have matching wounds. And then Gail says, how does she know how I got hurt? Clearly because she was the killer. Dewey runs in, Jill finds out that Sydney's still alive, so goes to kill her and gets kind of gets interrupted. Dewey gets hit with a fucking bedpan. But to get us to our final moment, fantastic, Sydney gets the defibrillators and gets ready to do up the head, and Gail's like, before I die, can I have one word? And Jill's like, what's that? And she goes, clear. And then, pretty cool. If you'd have said to me before Scream 4 came out, how do you think, give me a scenario in which one of these people dies in an interesting way, it would take me a long time to get to defibrillator, that's for sure. I like the comment that this film is making about how being famous and being talented have nothing to do with each other anymore. Wes is absolutely on his game. This is the best, looking film since the original. Like I said, finding new ground where it's hard to find new ground in these genres by being the middleman between the very popular post-Saw torture porn, pornography stuff, and still being true to what it is and what the original is. This is great. I really dig this one a lot. It's probably my second favorite of the whole bunch. I'm gonna give it 4 ghost faces.
Can't save them. All you can do is watch.
And finally, we have the confusingly titled Scream from 2022.
You ready for this? Never.
It's been another 11 years and all things old are new again. We're in the vibe of how great were the 90s. Look at the clothes, look at the music, look at Stranger Things, and look at the disposition. But in the same way that the hippie movement of the 1960s and 1970s was adopted by people who kind of forgot the values and kept the weed, I think that the 90s rebellion is being lost on this generation who's currently embracing it, because it's hard to be rebellious when you've got a device in your pocket that tracks your every fucking move. I also can't understand the mullet either. That doesn't belong in any time. And look, I'm not judging anybody here, but there's a few people in this film, and they know who they are, who've had a lot of Hollywood land work done. And I totally get it. It is a product of that environment. It is from a place where, for starters, in California, there's no seasons, so there's no evidence of the transience of things. So aging is looked upon as a disease, and if there's a disease, there must be a cure. And that seems to be the cure. Also, these people, some of them are in television programs and movies as well, but TV in particular, that's syndicated. It's stuff that's still shown. It's streamed regularly on a lot of different places. And that version of them doesn't age. And that must be really hard to watch that happen. And it's not just women, it's men too. Maybe that is indicative, like I said, of the environment. Maybe something about that environment is a little sick. We've got another classy kind of cold open thing going on here. And also, the first thing I noticed is this is clearly shot in 4 or even 8K because it is it's crisp. And it's got the correct bars as well. This time we're talking about elevated horror. Things like she mentions The Babadook or Midsommar or, one of these films that's Hereditary, something new and fresh that's about something. My example would be The Lighthouse. Horror movies or films in the horror suspense genre that are actually saying something, that have a message behind. It's not just kills for kill's sake. And again, they're trashing the 90s a little bit here. And you know what? You can get fucked because the music was cool and the hair was awesome, and the cartoons rocked, and the politics kind of sucked, but it was a good time. It was a good time to be a teenager. They also make a comment that the advent of modern technology, devices, being able to call 911, having an app on your phone that can lock your doors. It's making the very clear point that just because we have these things doesn't necessarily mean that we're safe. We're introduced to Sam, who's sort of like the new Sid, or a Sid surrogate. She's played by Melissa Berea. And we have Jack Quaid from The Boys, and also Dennis Quaid's balls. I laughed so hard when I wrote that down. I thought I'd be able to get away with it, but I couldn't. It's too funny. Dennis Quaid's balls. He actually ends up being the killer again. Surprise! Sam's sister gets attacked in the cold open. She has to return to Woodsboro to help out and to go and see her sister. And give it up for 2022 diversity as well. This cast is filled with people of colour and of different sexual orientation, whereas the previous Scream films, even the fourth one really, which was only 10 years previous to this, is white, and white.
We will be serving white cake.
They've populated the cast with a bunch of young actors who have some real dramatic chops. These are proper actors who are given characterization and motive and backgrounds and intent, which is, again, putting it into the elevated horror genre of having it not be the B-movie where they're all just dead meats that that they will ultimately become. And we have the return of Skeet. He comes back, and he's a ghost, a very de-aged ghost, who is talking to Sam, and because he is Sam's biological father. And we'll get back to that. Turns out Sam was a bit of a troublemaker when she lived in Woodsboro. The cops don't really like her much. She ditched when she was 18, after finding out that her dad was Billy Loomis and, that he was a serial killer. She discovered her mum's diaries in which she talks about being with Billy Loomis and getting pregnant and not telling the boyfriend at the time, was sort of, some sort of infidelity. And she had the kid, and then, Sam reads these diaries, confronts her mum, the dad hears, he leaves, she goes down a path of self-destruction and ultimately leaves Woodsboro and kind of her sister behind. And we get to poor Dewey. Oh man, he's run down, he doesn't work for the police anymore, he's kind of a drunk, he looks all ragged. Gail's on TV, they're not together anymore, she's got her own morning show, and Jack Quaid and Melissa Berea's characters turn up to talk to him, and he immediately starts grilling them about how long have you known him, how long have you known Richie. It's quite often someone who is in the immediate circle, which is really cool. After they leave, Dewey calls Sid to say, this is what's happening, don't go to Woodsboro. This one feels different somehow. And it should, because he's going to die later on. Maybe it's going to be like Star Wars, where I know they're making a 6th one and then probably a 7th one and an 8th one or whatever the fuck, but it's so that they get their trilogy for this new series. If they do it like they did Star Wars, like in this one it'll be, it'll be Dewey, and then the next one it'll be a Gale, and then the next one it'll be Nev Campbell. They systematically kind of killed off the main original cast. It was Luke and Han and Leia. Perhaps it's played and photographed like a drama. It's not glossy and extra at all, which I really dig. Randy's niece is sort of explaining to people in one scene that this is, what's happening. It's not a reboot and it's not a sequel, it's a requel, which is where you take legacy characters, mix them with new characters, and kind of flip things around. And it's usually much to the chagrin of Reddit users. I don't really know what Reddit is. I only hear about it in the context of people using it to complain about fucking Star Wars or whatever. And it's about, people being angry that things that they loved are being destroyed, or things that they really, care about, movies and stuff, their childhood's being destroyed, or whatever that fucking nonsense is. Poor Wes gets knifed through the throat, and then you get, not Wes Craven, obviously, the character called Wes. And then you get Gail kind of meeting Sam as well, and they have some familiarity. And then a beautiful tear-soaked reunion of Dewey and Gail, which actually plays like really heavy drama, like not in a way that you wouldn't expect, is what I'm saying. So Sam's sister's in the hospital, right? And she's watching, like, I know it's a nod to the original writer, Kevin Williamson, but she's watching Dawson's Creek. Like, Jesus Christ. If you're a millennial, or if you're anybody, under the age of 22, tell me that you're watching Dawson's Creek on something. It must be like looking into a fucking parallel dimension. Ghostface goes after the sister again in the hospital to kind of finish the job, and Dewey makes the ultimate sacrifice. He is killed by Ghostface at this point. It's really sad that the Ghostface character says it was an honor, and you feel the weight of his death, especially when you cut to the Gale finding out. It's again more drama than this film would probably need if it was just a B movie. Sid finally arrives in the film about just at the second act turn, or the dark night of the soul, and she speaks to Sam, knowing that she is Billy Loomis's daughter, and she is saying, "I'm taking my sister and my boyfriend. I'm getting the fuck out of town. Like this is not the safest place to be." And Sydney's like, "That's not going to help. You're still going to have to face this somehow." And she says, "We're gonna have to finish what Billy Loomis started. But before we do that, unfortunately, the young sister forgets her inhaler, says that she has an extra one at her friend's house, and they stop off where? At a third act party. So we're at Amber's, who is the young sister's friends, and we've stopped off to get this inhaler, and there's a party going on, and we have the killing start. And one of the guys gets killed because he's got a phone app, like a Find Your Phone app, and his girlfriend also has it, and this they've Ghostface has stolen the phone, and so he gets killed via app. And what this is saying, kids, is that maybe you should put your phone down once in a while lest you get stabbed. Like, I'm not saying that that's definitely going to happen, but if you're walking around looking at your phone all the time, you're not necessarily going to notice a stabber on the way to do a stabbing. So Amber, who's played by Mikey Madsen, who was the young girl who does a lot of the screaming in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, she's revealed as the killer, and then Jack Quaid's character Richie is revealed as the second killer, and they are toxic fans. And they even use that phrase. People who go on Reddit and again, like I said, scream about their childhood being ruined. They're like, the original Stab movie was the best, and they fucking polluted it, and they don't understand that people care about this stuff, and so they insinuated themselves into Sam's life, and were able to kind of, pull this shit off. So what they want to do is save the franchise and frame Sam so that they can start it all over again. Gale and Sydney whoop Amber's ass, shoot her and set her on fire. Let's not forget, this is the second time that this young woman has been set on fire in as many years. And Sam takes on Richie, and she basically says, the new rule of the franchise is don't fuck with the daughter of a serial killer. And she just wails on this guy with his own knife. She turns him into mince. It is outrageous. I really dig the prestige quality of this. Like I said, it's really well shot. They're paying attention to drama and to characterization. They're giving people, intentions and obstacles and motivations. Like I said, in a way that you wouldn't necessarily need to for a film like this. It plays into genre conventions, but twists them for a modern lens. The reboot, requel, sequel, whatever the hell it is. That's a really interesting comment to make. And I'm excited to see where they take it from here. Scream 6 is definitely coming out. I'm not sure when, but I'm game. I also like that it's commenting on toxic fandom, because it's a serious problem that we have, particularly in the online space, that these people who are racist and sexist and in some cases dangerous are having this kind of discourse online around pop culture, around film, things that should be joyful, and wonderful to experience. It's supremely fucked up. It's also a place where real villains can hide. They start talking about this stuff because it gives them a platform to be poisonous and to corrupt other people's thought processes, particularly younger people who are easily influenced. Take what people think of them online as reality and that it means anything when it actually doesn't. That's their way in, and we all need to understand that this is what's happening, whether you see it in a Scream movie or not. Now, having said all that, I really do dig this film. It is a good sort of reinvention of the franchise. I'm excited to see what it'll end up being. And hey, at the end it says 4 Wes, and I nearly shed a tear. Very classy. We're going to go ahead and give it 4 ghost faces.
Hello, Sydney. It's an honor.
So that's it, folks. I hope you enjoyed this Screamathon. Happy fucking Halloween. I hope you're having a good pumpkin time. And it was great. It was great to be back. I love doing this show. I know there haven't been as many It does take a lot longer to produce than just a podcast, so you'll have to forgive me there. And let's just go through the ranking of the Scream films just really quickly. I'm going to get my little notes up here. Definitely number 1, obviously. It's an absolute classic. Can't be beat. You know, it is the beginning. It is the progenitor of all this stuff, and is one of a kind. I kind of dig number 4 next, honestly. I think it's interesting in the way that it deals with celebrity and you know, the perception of what fame is as opposed to what fame actually is, where you don't need to do anything in particular, you just need to be seen. Really great, and it's really slickly made, and it's kind of the best looking one of these films out of all of them, honestly. I kind of like Scream 2022 for my number 3 spot. It's really interesting the way that they're talking about toxic fandom and you know, the lengths that some crazy people will go to protect the things that they feel like they somehow have ownership over. It looks really good. The cast is great. The drama works. It's it's really good. So that's number 3 for me. Number 4 is number 3. I think it is fun living with inside the Hollywood system. There's some uncomfortable stuff that you have to deal with when watching that through a 2022 or, you know, post 2016 lens with the Me Too movement and whatnot. But it is, you know, well produced, and you know, Wes is on his game. And finally, number 2, because it's just weak. The script issues that it had, its rush into production, you know, its poor sort of idea around who the killers would be, and that it's you know, about violence in the cinema when they just go and do that. It kind of steps on its own toes a lot, and that frustrates me. So that's the last one. But I do really like the franchise. I'm interested to see where it goes. This is more my style of horror as well. Not super gory. I don't dig in all that stuff. Psychological, you know, prestige looking, shot anamorphically, like I said, beautiful. But I will say, if you want a balm to this, and I had to do it myself because I watched 5 of these in less than 24 hours, go and watch Scary Movie, because it's fucking hilarious. Like, it's one of the best spoof movies since Spaceballs, or what's the other one? Robin Hood Men in Tights. Like, it's really funny. There's just like so many gags, and if you watch it more than once, and I've watched it plenty of times, in the background there's stuff going on that you know, notice, like in Flying High. You know, there's heaps of shit going on in the background and stuff, and it's shot like the Scream is. It even pulls directly from scenes, and there's some deleted scenes, if you can find them online, that are absolutely hilarious. So go and check out Scary Movie as a balm, as a salve after watching all the Screams. So there we have it, folks. Another Halloween over, another athon complete. Thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it, and we'll see you next time for something else on the Silly Stitcher. Cheers.